Anticipated face-to-face talks between the US and Iran in Switzerland were supposed to happen this week. Instead, following a rapid exchange of reciprocal drone and missile strikes, the meetings were quietly and abruptly canceled. These negotiations functioned as a tactical stalling maneuver, a public-facing theater used to buy time for the movement of heavy assets while keeping regional players focused on a deal that was already fracturing. Intelligence reports, including assessments attributed to the CIA, indicate the deal was rushed into place specifically to serve an election cycle. By prioritizing a short-term diplomatic headline, the administration created a framework that was easy to break and likely intended for abandonment once the domestic political objective was achieved. While the public heard talk of de-escalation, the logistical reality told a different story. In the span of a single week, a massive volume of U.S. military cargo arrived in the Middle East, flooding the region with weaponry during the exact window when peace was supposedly being discussed. This suggests that global diplomacy is currently acting as a screen for a shadow war, where the physical pieces are already locked into position on the board. Beneath the diplomatic radar, the escalation is moving fast. Unmarked drones recently launched warning strikes on targets in Bahrain and Kuwait. Meanwhile, under heavy U.S. pressure, the Iraqi government preemptively arrested 47 pro-Iran politicians right before the Iranian foreign minister arrived in the country. Iran immediately leveraged its primary geographic advantage in response: control over the Strait of Hormuz. Their foreign minister warned Arab nations that they must handle their own security and abandon their reliance on the U.S. military, or risk losing access to the strait. But the Allied response focused on bypassing this territorial threat. Rather than engaging in the strait, a fleet of nearly 50 cargo vessels successfully utilized an alternative shipping route through Omani territory, effectively sidestepping the Iranian blockade. With the primary geographic choke points actively being avoided by alternative routes, the strategic focus has shifted. The conflict is now centered on economic endurance, forcing an opponent to bear the rising costs of trade in a destabilized region. Traditional superpower strategy relies on massive technological superiority. However, that reliance is being tested by the missile math of modern asymmetric warfare. This chart highlights a massive financial disparity. On the right, an Iranian offensive drone costs roughly $20,000. On the left, the US or Israeli interceptor missile required to shoot it down costs millions. A 100% interception rate in the sky can still result in a strategic loss on the balance sheet. By using expensive, high-end interceptors to counter cheap, mass-produced drones, the U.S. is facing a rapid depletion of its military budget. This drain has forced an emergency pivot. Defense contractors are now being directed to move away from complex, multi-million-dollar systems and instead focus on mass-producing cheap, disposable missiles to match the enemy's unit cost. The shift toward low-cost, high-volume hardware has placed a significant strain on the financial logic of the world's most expensive military apparatus. While empires calculate the cost of missiles and trade routes, the populations living under these threats are facing a breakdown of community stability that exists far below the level of state-to-state conflict. Rather than unifying in the face of regional instability, many communities are paralyzing themselves with deep internal friction. Online spaces are consumed by Shia-Sunni sectarian infighting, with neighbors actively branding one another as enemies. This internal friction is driven by a stark double standard in how people are judged. A celebrity like Shah Rukh Khan can spend a career in the secular spotlight and find total acceptance after a brief clip of prayer. Yet a local neighbor with a slightly different interpretation of history often faces total condemnation, proving that sectarian labels often override actual personal conduct. This fracturing has tangible consequences for public safety. When communities are divided, massive religious gatherings, like dense Ashura processions, become difficult to secure, turning large-scale expressions of faith into vulnerable targets for external violence. Sectarian squabbles often distract from immediate physical dangers. While people argue online, minority homes are being leveled by state-sanctioned bulldozers, and individuals face the real threat of mob violence in the streets. This internal fracturing provides a strategic opening for external powers. A society that destabilizes itself from within is often defeated long before the first missile is even launched.